My true story from Colorado. When my son got married, I sat alone at table 19. Thank God I never mentioned the $250 million fortune my husband left me, because 7 days later, his new wife arrived with legal papers. Sometimes the deepest betrayals come wrapped in wedding invitations and sealed with a mother's hope. I'm Margaret Chen, and I learned that truth sitting alone at my son's wedding reception, watching him laugh with strangers while I folded my napkin into smaller and smaller squares, trying to make myself match. Nobody at that glittering ballroom knew about the fortune sleeping in my name. Not my son David. Not his bride Jessica. Not one of the 200 guests who walked past my corner table without stopping. And 7 days later, when Jessica knocked on my door with a lawyer and a practiced smile, I understood why my late husband's last words had been a warning. Some secrets, Ming Ming, are for their own protection. The mountains of Colorado can be cruel in their beauty. From my kitchen window, I see peaks that never change while everything else falls away. Edward died 3 winters back, leaving me with this house that echoes and days that stretch like taffy. David calls when he remembers. Visits when obligation outweighs inconvenience. I tell myself this is natural, this drift between mother and grown son. I tell myself many things in the quiet. My routines became my companions. Tea at dawn, strong and bitter the way Edward taught me. Crosswords filled out in pencil because permanence feels presumptuous. Walking the garden paths where nothing blooms on schedule anymore, as if the flowers too have given up on timing. The mailbox stays empty most days, and I've learned not to look at it with expectation, only habit. David's call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was repotting the orchids, trying to save something that probably preferred to be let go. Mom, I have news. I'm getting married. His voice carried that quality of someone reading from notes, hitting the necessary points. Her name was Jessica. The wedding would be in May. They'd found a venue. How wonderful, I said, dirt still under my fingernails. When can I meet her? Soon, he said, which I'd learned was his way of saying never. She's really busy with planning. He offered help. Suggested the family recipes for the reception. The photographer who'd captured every important moment of his childhood. Each offer met with polite deflection. They had it covered. The professionals would handle everything. My presence was requested, not required. When I hung up, I stood in my greenhouse surrounded by things I'd kept alive through sheer stubbornness and wondered when I'd become optional in my own son's life. Loss doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's a slow leak, so gradual you don't notice until you're empty. It's your child's voice getting formal. It's holidays that become cards instead of visits. It's being told about a wedding like you're a distant relative who needs notification. The week before the wedding, something pulled me to Edward's study. I'd left it untouched. His reading glasses still marking his place in a book about astronomy. Behind his desk, built into the wall like it had always belonged there, was a safe I'd never opened. Edward had given me the combination years ago, written on a card that said, "When you're ready." I wasn't ready. But I was tired of being caught off guard by life. Inside, everything was arranged with Edward's particular precision. Documents in order, each folder labeled in his architect's handwriting. At the front, an envelope with my Chinese name, the one only he used. His letter was brief like him. Ming Ming, if you're reading this, you're finally asking the right questions. What I've left isn't just money. It's choice. David is our son, but he's also his own man. Don't let love make you foolish. The accounts are yours alone. 250 million. Yes, you read that right. I was better at investing than talking. Use it wisely. Protect yourself first. Love doesn't mean being emptied. The numbers seemed impossible. We'd lived carefully, modestly. Edward's architecture firm had done well, but this? I found myself laughing, then crying, then sitting very still. All those years of clipping coupons while Edward had been quietly building a fortress of numbers. He'd known something I was only beginning to see. I locked the safe and told no one. Knowledge I was learning could be its own kind of armor. The wedding venue sprawled across a hillside, all glass and ambition. I arrived wearing the navy dress I'd saved for special occasions, though I couldn't remember the last one. The parking attendant directed me to the overflow lot. I walked in heels that pinched, past younger guests who moved like they belonged. At the reception desk, a bright-faced girl handed me a place card. "Table 19, she chirped. I looked for some designation, mother of the groom, family, anything. Just my name, no different from any other guest. Table 19 lived in the shadow of a pillar, close enough to the kitchen that every swing of the door brought waves of steam and clatter. My table mates included David's barber, someone's accountant, and a couple who spent the evening arguing in whispers. We were the miscellaneous file, the obligation invites, the people who didn't fit anywhere else. I watched David at the head table, glowing under lights that seemed designed to create distance. Jessica moved like water, every gesture calculated for grace. She touched his arm and he turned to her like a plant to sun. When had I lost the ability to draw his attention like that? The speeches began. Jessica's father welcomed David to the family. Her sister shared childhood memories. Friends told stories about a couple's trips I'd never heard about. When the microphone made its rounds, it never found me. I sat with words pooling in my throat. About the boy who'd insisted on sleeping with a nightlight until he was 10. Who'd called me every day his first month of college, who'd once said I was his best friend. But those stories belonged to someone else now. Someone who raided a better table. I counted the centerpieces, watched ice sculptures melt, smiled when photographers swept past without stopping. During the mother-son dance, the one I'd imagined since David was small, I watched him dance with Jessica's mother instead. "She's like a second mom to me," he'd said into the microphone, and I felt something inside me quietly close. No one noticed when I left. In the car, I let myself feel it all. The ache of being forgotten, the weight of becoming past tense. But underneath that pain, something else stirred. The knowledge of Edward's gift. The power of being underestimated. The strange freedom of invisibility. A week later, David called. His voice carried that rehearsed quality again, like he was working from a checklist. "Mom, wondering if you could come by tomorrow. Just me, Jessica has a spa thing. Thought we could catch up." As if we'd been busy, not distant. I arrived with fresh-baked coconut tarts, the kind he'd loved as a child. His house looked like a magazine spread. Everything matching, nothing memorable. He hugged me at the door, the kind where bodies don't quite meet. Inside, the dining table was set for two, but something felt staged. Wine already poured. Papers stacked beside the plates like a business meeting. "Mom," he started, pouring himself more wine though his glass wasn't empty. "I wanted to talk about the future. Planning ahead. Making sure you're protected." The papers were dense with legal terms, but I recognized the shape of them. Power of attorney, asset management, complete financial control, immediate and irrevocable. "It's standard," David continued, his smile too wide. "Everyone's doing it. In case something happens. For your protection." Protection. The word tasted like copper. I picked up the documents, read them slowly while David fidgeted. This wasn't protection. It was a transfer of power wrapped in concern. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. His face tightened for just a moment. Of course. But sooner is better. You know, before. While everything's clear. While I was still competent, he meant. While I could still sign my life away. I drove home with the papers on my passenger seat and Edward's voice in my head. Love doesn't mean being emptied. That night I called Eleanor Kim, an old friend who'd become a financial attorney. We met for tea, and I showed her everything. David's papers, Edward's fortune, my fears. This is aggressive, she said, reading through David's documents. This gives him control of everything immediately. No oversight. No conditions. We spent the next week building walls. Trusts within trust. Legal structures that looked like compliance but were actually fortresses. I moved Edward's millions into vehicles David couldn't touch, couldn't even see. Eleanor added provisions that would trigger if anyone tried to declare me incompetent. We filmed me reading newspaper headlines, doing complex math, discussing market conditions. Evidence of a sharp mind, dated and witnessed. You're preparing for war, Eleanor observed. No, I said. I'm preparing for my family. 7 days after the wedding, my doorbell rang at exactly 2 in the afternoon. Through the peephole I saw Jessica, and she wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood beside her, briefcase in hand. Behind them, another woman with the bearing of someone who witnessed things for a living. I opened the door wearing my gardening clothes. Dirt deliberately under my nails. Let them see what they expected. An old woman puttering around, easy to manipulate. Margaret. Jessica's smile could have powered a small city. I hope we're not interrupting. This is Mr. Paulson, a family friend who happens to be a notary. We thought we'd help you get those papers David mentioned sorted out. They'd brought their own papers. More aggressive than David's. Conservatorship documents. Claims about my confusion at the wedding, my isolation, my vulnerability. Jessica talked while the lawyer nodded, painting a picture of an elderly woman who needed managing. I let them talk. Let them think my silence was confusion. When Jessica finally pushed the papers across my kitchen table, I reached for my teapot instead. Would you like some tea? Asked mildly. Margaret, we really should focus. Tea first, I said, moving with deliberate slowness. Edward always said important decisions require proper tea. I could see Jessica's impatience crackling beneath her smile. While the water boiled, I sent a text from the phone in my pocket. Eleanor was waiting. When I finally sat down, I pulled out my own folder. Before we discuss your papers, perhaps you should see mine. The cease and desist letter was beautiful in its simplicity. The notices of recorded conversations. Colorado is a one-party consent state. The evidence of Jessica's previous elderly target in Maine. The widow she'd befriended and drained. The forensic accounting showing her debts, her patterns, her history. You researched the wrong woman, I said quietly. You saw a widow. You saw alone. You saw easy. You didn't see protected. Jessica's face went through a series of changes. Surprise, anger, calculation. The lawyer began packing up quickly. The witness stepped backward. David doesn't know, I continued. Yet. But he will, if you don't leave immediately. And if you ever try this again with me or anyone else, the world will know exactly who you are. They left without the dramatics I'd expected. Predators prefer easy prey, and I'd just shown my teeth. That evening, David called, confused and angry. Jessica had told him some story about me being paranoid, hostile. I listened to him defend her, excuse her, choose her. When he finished, I spoke carefully. I love you, David. But love doesn't mean being emptied. When you're ready to see what happened today. Really see it. I'll be here. Until then, be careful. Both of you. The line went quiet. Then he hung up. I sat in my kitchen as darkness gathered outside. The orchids needed water. The mountains stood unchanged. Somewhere, Jessica was recalculating. David was choosing sides. And I was learning that sometimes love means letting someone go far enough to see where they'll land. The money stayed secret. My defenses held. And in the quiet that followed, I discovered something. Being alone isn't the same as being powerless. Being forgotten isn't the same as being gone. Edward had left me more than money. He'd left me the ability to say no. To stand firm. To protect myself even from those who should have protected me. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone who should have been protecting you? When family becomes adversary, when love becomes leverage, how do you find the strength to stand firm? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you. If you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table, if you've ever had to choose between being loved and being safe, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to be emptied by those who claim to love us. The papers sat on my kitchen table like a verdict I hadn't asked for. Jessica's perfume still lingered in the air. Something expensive and predatory. The notary's briefcase had left a small scratch on the wood, right next to where Edward used to set his coffee cup every morning for 30 years. They'd been gone for 10 minutes, but I could still feel their presence, the way you can feel a storm even after it passes. I picked up my phone with hands that barely trembled and dialed Eleanor. She answered on the first ring. She'd been waiting. They left, I said simply. And the recording. Every word. Just like you said. Colorado's one-party consent law is a beautiful thing. Good. Now the real work begins, Margaret. Are you ready for what comes next? Was I ready? I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd taught David to make dumplings, where Edward had proposed over burnt toast, where life had been simple and love hadn't required lawyers. Ready seemed like too small a word for what I needed to be. The call from David came 3 hours later. I'd been expecting it, had even made a fresh pot of tea and set out 2 cups out of habit before remembering he wouldn't be coming. His voice was a mix of confusion and accusation, like a child who'd been told Santa wasn't real. Mom, what did you do? Jessica came home in tears. She said you threatened her, that you had some lawyer ambush her. This isn't like you. Isn't like me. As if he knew who I was anymore. As if the woman at table 19 was the sum total of my existence. David, I said, keeping my voice level. What exactly did Jessica tell you she was doing at my house? She said she was bringing some papers. To help you. To make sure you were protected. Protected from what? The silence stretched. I could hear him breathing, could picture him in that magazine-perfect house, trying to reconcile the mother he'd forgotten with the woman who'd just outmaneuvered his wife. She was trying to help, he said finally, but the conviction was draining from his voice. With a notary. With witnesses. With conservatorship papers that would have given her. Not you, David, her complete control over my life. That's not. She wouldn't. I have it all recorded. Would you like to hear it? Would you like to hear your wife explaining how confused I seemed at your wedding, how I'm showing signs of decline, how it would be better for everyone if someone younger managed my affairs? More silence. The kind that feels like a chasm opening between what you believed and what is. She said you were paranoid, he whispered. Paranoid. Or prepared. There's a difference, son. One that might save you someday. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone, wondering when goodbye had become our default, when conversations had started ending instead of beginning. Eleanor arrived the next morning with a box of documents and a grim expression. "Jessica's already talking to lawyers," she said, setting up at my dining table. "She's going to try the concerned family angle. We need to be ready." We spent the day building my defense in reverse. Not just protecting what I had, but creating a paper trail that showed competence, clarity, engagement. Every charity I supported, every investment decision I'd made, every complex puzzle I'd completed dated and documented. It felt like proving I deserved to exist independently, but Eleanor reminded me that's exactly what it was. "The vultures circle the elderly," she said, organizing files. "They look for isolation, for family rifts, for any sign of weakness. Jessica's good at this. She's done it before." "How many times?" "Twice that we've found. Once in Maine, once in New Hampshire. Both women were widows. Both had sons who were distant. Both lost everything before anyone noticed." I thought about those women, alone in their empty houses, wondering how love had become theft. At least I'd seen it coming. At least Edward had made sure I'd have the weapons to fight back. The next few days passed in a blur of legal preparation and aching silence. David didn't call. I didn't expect him to. He was processing, Eleanor said. Or he was choosing sides. Or he was already gone, and I just hadn't accepted it yet. But Jessica wasn't done. The doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon. This time, I checked the security cameras Eleanor had insisted I install. Jessica again, but now with David beside her. His face looked haggard, older. He was carrying flowers, carnations from the grocery store, the kind you grab as an afterthought. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Sometimes boundaries need to be physical as well as emotional. "Mom," David started. "Can we talk?" "Please." "There's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Such a convenient word for attempted elder abuse. "We can talk here," I said, staying in the doorway. "Say what you need to say." Jessica tried her smile again, but it faltered against my stillness. "Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was only trying to help. David's been so worried about you, all alone up here." "I'm not alone," I interrupted. "I have friends. I have activities. Have a life. What I don't have is a need for supervision." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, nobody's saying you need supervision. We just want to make sure you're okay. That you're protected." That word again. Protection as a weapon, care as a cage. "I am protected," I said calmly. "I have excellent lawyers. I have complete control of my faculties. I have security cameras recording this conversation. And I have information about your wife that I'm sure she hasn't shared with you." Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment. A flash of something hard and calculating before the concerned expression returned. "I don't know what you think you know." "Evelyn Morrison," I said quietly. "Portland, Maine. 2019. Ring any bells?" Jessica went very still. David looked between us, confused. "Who's Evelyn Morrison?" "Why don't you tell him, Jessica? Tell him about the elderly widow you befriended. Tell him about the power of attorney she signed. Tell him about the house that somehow ended up in your name." "That was different," Jessica said quickly. "She wanted to help me. She didn't have any family. She had a daughter in California. A daughter who's been trying to untangle what you did for 3 years." David turned to his wife, and I saw something shift in his face. Not completely understanding yet, but the beginning of it. "Jess, what is she talking about?" "It's not what it sounds like," Jessica started, but David was already backing away from her. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded young, suddenly lost. "Can I Can I come in? Alone. I looked at my son. Really looked at him for the first time since the wedding. He seemed smaller somehow, like discovering your spouse is a predator takes up actual physical space. But I'd learned something about protection these past weeks. Sometimes protecting yourself means saying no, even when every instinct screams yes. Not today, I said gently. You need to sort through this. Figure out what's true. Decide who you want to be. When you've done that, really done that, call me. We'll have tea. Jessica tried one more time. This is ridiculous. I'm your daughter-in-law. We're family. No, I said firmly. Family doesn't come with legal documents. Family doesn't require notaries. Family doesn't research your assets before proposing. That last bit was a guess, but from the way Jessica's face changed, I knew I'd hit the truth. She had researched me. She just hadn't dug deep enough. They left in separate cars. David sat in his for a long time before driving away. I watched from my window, wondering if this was the last time I'd see him, wondering if losing him to truth was better than losing him to lies. Eleanor called that evening. Jessica's backing off. My contact at her law firm says she's dropping the whole thing. Apparently she's got bigger problems. The Morrison family has renewed their complaint with the Maine authorities. What about David? That's up to him now, isn't it? It was up to him. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one reaching out, calling, trying. I was just waiting. And in that waiting, I found something I'd lost. Dignity. The days that followed had a different quality of quiet. Not the silence of being forgotten, but the silence of space being cleared. I returned to my routines. Tea at dawn, crosswords in pencil, garden walks. But they felt different now. Chosen rather than default. Mine rather than leftovers. A week passed. Then two. I heard through Eleanor that David had filed for separation from Jessica. That he'd hired a forensic accountant. That he'd discovered debts, lies, a whole history she'd hidden. I felt for him. The pain of discovering you've been sleeping next to a stranger. But I didn't call. Some lessons have to be learned alone. It was a month later when his car appeared in my driveway. I watched him sit there for 5 minutes before getting out, gathering courage or words or both. When he finally knocked, I was ready. He looked older, thinner. His expensive clothes were replaced with jeans and a college sweatshirt I remembered buying him 20 years ago. He carried nothing. No flowers, no papers, no agenda except the weight of his own reckoning. "Hi, Mom," he said simply. "Hello, David." We stood there for a moment, testing the space between us. Then I stepped aside. "Would you like some tea?" He nodded, and I led him to the kitchen. He sat in his old spot, the one with the view of the mountains. I made tea the way I always had. His with honey, mine without. Some things didn't need to change. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not just for Jessica. For before. For table 19. For forgetting you. For treating you like an obligation." He flinched but nodded. "I got so caught up in the life I was building, I forgot about the life that built me. I forgot that you're a person, not just my mom." It wasn't enough. No words could be. But it was a beginning. We talked for hours. About Jessica, gone, moved to Seattle, targeting someone new. About the wedding. He'd noticed my absence during the mother-son dance but had been too caught up to care. About the papers. He'd been genuinely ignorant of her real intentions, thought it was about helping. "She played me," he said at one point. "But I let her. I was so ready to believe you needed managing that I didn't question it." "Why were you ready to believe that?" He thought for a long time. Because it was easier than seeing you as you are. Easier than acknowledging that I'd been a terrible son. If you were declining, then my distance was protective. If you needed managing, then my absence was justified. The honesty hurt, but it was clean. The kind that could heal. I need to tell you something, I said finally. About your father. About what he left. I told him everything. The fortune. The protection. The choice to keep it secret. I watched his face go through shock, understanding, and something that might have been shame. You could have mentioned it at any time, he said quietly. The wedding. When I brought those papers. When Jessica showed up. You could have shut everything down just by telling me. Yes, but would you have heard me? Or would you have heard the money? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Your father knew, I continued. He knew that money changes people. He wanted to protect me, even from you if necessary. And he was right. So what happens now? With the money, I mean. Nothing. It's mine. It will remain mine. When I die, most will go to charity, education funds for kids who can't afford it. Some will go to you, but in trust, protected from anyone who might try to take it. Including you. He nodded slowly. That's fair. We finished our tea in silence that felt different from all the silences before. This one had possibility in it. Can I ask you something? David said eventually. At the wedding, when you were sitting alone at that back table. What were you thinking? I considered the question, remembering the weight of that moment. I was thinking that I'd become invisible. That I'd raised a son who could celebrate the biggest day of his life without seeing me. I was thinking about your father, about secrets, about the price of love. And I was thinking that maybe being forgotten was its own kind of freedom. You weren't forgotten, he said, but even he didn't believe it. Yes, I was. But that's okay. Because in being forgotten, I remembered myself. I remembered that I'm not just your mother. I'm Margaret Chen. I'm a woman who survived immigration, built a life, raised a family, and inherited a fortune. I'm someone who can stop a predator in her tracks and protect what's mine. Being forgotten by you helped me remember all of that. David stayed for dinner. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread. We talked about safer things. His work, the weather, a book we'd both read. When he left, he hugged me properly for the first time in years. Not the careful, distant embraces we'd grown used to, but something real. Can I come back? He asked at the door. Yes. But David, come because you want to, not because you feel you have to. I'd rather have an honest absence than a dutiful presence. He nodded and left. I watched his taillights disappear and felt something settle in my chest. Not quite peace, but the possibility of it. The money remained my secret from the world, though David now knew. The house felt less empty, though I still lived alone. The quiet had changed from abandonment to choice. And somewhere in Maine, another widow was getting her house back because one predator had aimed too high and hit steel instead of vulnerability. I made myself a final cup of tea and stood by the window. The mountains were turning purple in the evening light, eternal and unchanged. Edward would have been proud, I thought. Not of the money or the legal maneuvering, but of the simple fact that I'd protected myself. That I'd chosen my own worth over anyone else's convenience. The orchids were blooming finally, late but vibrant. Sometimes things grow in their own time, regardless of what season says they should. Sometimes strength comes disguised as silence, and protection looks like loneliness, and love means letting someone go far enough away to see you clearly. I raised my cup to Edward's memory, to Eleanor's friendship, to David's possible return, and to my own unexpected becoming. The woman at table 19 had been invisible. The woman standing at this window was anything but. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Jessica might resurface. David might disappoint again. The money might complicate things in ways I couldn't foresee. But tonight, in my kitchen with its scratched table and mountain view, I was exactly where I belonged. Not at anyone else's table, but at my own. Not in anyone else's story, but writing my own ending. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The phone rang as I was heading to bed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello. Is this Margaret Chen? A woman's voice, uncertain and tired. Yes. My name is Patricia Hartwell. I'm from New Hampshire. I think you know my mother-in-law. Jessica Hartwell. She's going by Jessica Chen now, but... Another widow. Another son. Another story beginning where mine was ending. I sat down slowly. Tell me everything, I said. Because some knowledge is meant to be shared. Some protection extends beyond ourselves. And sometimes the best thing we can do with our own survival is use it to help someone else survive too. Patricia talked for an hour. Her mother-in-law, 83 and trusting. Her husband, caught between love and suspicion. The papers that had appeared last week. The same pattern, the same words, the same predator in different clothes. Stop her, I said when Patricia finally paused. Get lawyers. Document everything. Don't let politeness kill your mother-in-law's independence. And Patricia, tell your husband that love doesn't mean letting someone be emptied. Not even by family. Especially not by family. I gave her Eleanor's number. Promised to send the documentation about Jessica's history. Offered what I'd learned the hard way. That sometimes protecting the people we love means protecting them from the people they love. When I finally went to bed, I felt the weight of connection. Not the false connection of family that takes, but the real connection of women who understand. Who survives. Who refuses to be made small by anyone's convenience. My story with Jessica was ending, but Patricia's was just beginning. And somewhere else, another woman was probably sitting at her kitchen table, staring at papers she didn't understand, feeling the walls close in. We couldn't save them all. But we could try. We could share our knowledge like breadcrumbs in the forest, hoping someone would follow them home. The last thing I thought before sleeping was that Edward would have liked this. Not the pain or the betrayal, but the building of networks. The architecture of protection. The careful construction of a world where widows weren't victims but warriors. Table 19 had been my exile. But every exile carries the seeds of its own revolution. And mine had finally bloomed, late but strong, in a kitchen in Colorado where an old woman had remembered she was more than what anyone else needed her to be. The fortune slept safely in its trusts and accounts. My son was finding his way back to the truth. Jessica was discovering that some prey have teeth. And I was learning that the best inheritance isn't money or property or even love. It's the knowledge that you can save yourself. And once you know that, you can save others too. One conversation at a time. One woman at a time. One story at a time. Until the predators learn that we're not alone anymore. We never were. We just needed to find each other across the silence, across the tables they put us at, across the space they thought would keep us weak. But we're not weak. We're just quiet. And quiet, I was learning, has its own kind of power. The kind that changes everything. What would you do if your family saw your kindness as weakness? If the people meant to protect you were the ones you needed protection from? Share your story below. Because sometimes the first step to strength is admitting we need it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible at your own table, if you've ever had to choose between being loved and being safe, hit that subscribe button now. Let's build a community where no one faces their Jessica alone. Because together, we're stronger than any paper they can bring to our doors. The phone call with Patricia Hartwell changed everything. Not just for her but for me. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the women sitting at their kitchen tables, staring at papers they didn't understand, feeling the walls close in. By morning I had a plan. Eleanor arrived at 9 sharp, looking curious at my urgent summons. I poured her tea and laid out my vision. I want to create a foundation, I said. Not just charity. Protection. A network for women like us. Widows, elderly mothers, women alone. Legal resources, financial education, and most importantly, early warning systems. Eleanor set down her cup slowly. You're talking about taking on predators systematically. I'm talking about making sure no one sits at table 19 without backup. We spent the next 3 months building it. The Chen Foundation for Elder Protection. Edward would have appreciated the acronym CFEP, which sounded like STEP when you said it fast. One step at a time, he used to talk about his buildings. One step at a time, we'd protect women from their own families if necessary. The first meeting was small. Patricia Hartwell drove down from New Hampshire with her mother-in-law, Sarah. Evelyn Morrison flew in from Maine, finally free of Jessica's tangles but wanting to help others avoid her fate. 6 women gathered in my living room, sharing stories that sounded different but felt the same. My daughter-in-law started visiting more after Harold died, Sarah said quietly. So helpful. So concerned. Then came the suggestions about my confusion. My nephew, another woman added. Suddenly worried about my ability to manage the farm. Never cared before I inherited it free and clear. We created a system. Legal templates for protection. Warning signs to watch for. A buddy system where women checked on each other weekly. Eleanor volunteered to review documents pro bono. I funded it all quietly. The fortune finally serving its true purpose. Word spread the way important things do. Whispered between church pews, shared over grocery carts, passed along at book clubs. Women called from Denver, from Phoenix, from small towns I'd never heard of. Each story is a variation on the same theme. Family who saw opportunity instead of obligation. Meanwhile, David's divorce proceeded with the grinding inevitability of truth meeting consequences. Jessica fought it at first, then disappeared one night, leaving behind debts and 3 more elderly victims we uncovered in her wake. The FBI got involved. Turns out interstate elder fraud is a federal crime. David threw himself into making amends with the fervor of the newly converted. He volunteered with the foundation, using his financial knowledge to help women understand their assets. He sat with sons and daughters, showing them what he'd almost become, warning them about the slippery slope from distance to exploitation. I didn't see it, he told one group, 6 months after that day with the notary. I told myself I was being responsible, practical. But really I was being greedy. Greedy and lazy. It's easier to manage someone than to love them. Easier to take than to give. His honesty was brutal and necessary. Some children heard him and changed course. Others stormed out, offended. But seeds were planted. Conversations started. The silence began to break. One evening, almost a year after the wedding, David appeared at my door with something I didn't expect. A woman. Not young, not flashy. A kindergarten teacher named Amy with laugh lines and gentle eyes. Mom, this is Amy. We met at the foundation. She was helping her grandmother understand a reverse mortgage scam. Amy shook my hand warmly. I've heard so much about you. Not the money. David didn't mention that for months. The real you. We had dinner in the garden. Simple food, honest conversation. Amy asked about the orchids, about Edward, about my life before everything changed. She saw me not as David's mother or a potential resource, but as Margaret. It was like being discovered after years of excavation. When they left, David hugged me at the door. "I'm seeing her, not her potential inheritance," he said quietly. "I'm seeing people now. Really seeing them. It's harder but better. That's all any of us want," I told him. To be seen. Not managed. Not handled. Just seen. The foundation grew. We helped prosecute 3 cases of elder fraud that year. Prevented dozens more through education and intervention. Created safe spaces for difficult conversations about money, death, and the complicated love between generations. I testified at Jessica's trial. She sat at the defendant's table in a conservative suit, trying to look vulnerable. But I'd learned something about performance and reality. I told the jury about Table 19. About the papers. About the careful way predators choose their victims. She didn't see an elder to rob, I said clearly. She saw a mother distanced from her son. A widow isolated by grief. A woman trained to be polite even when being emptied. She saw me clearly. She just didn't see deeply enough. Jessica got 7 years. Not enough, but something. The other victims found closure, if not restitution. And somewhere, another Jessica was watching the news coverage and reconsidering her plans. The mountains turned gold that autumn, then white with early snow. The foundation bought a small building downtown. Nothing fancy, but central and accessible. We held workshops on Tuesdays, legal clinics on Thursdays, and Sunday dinners for anyone who needed to not eat alone. I found myself surrounded by women who understood. Helen, who'd caught her daughter-in-law researching nursing homes while she was perfectly healthy. Joan, whose son had tried to have her declared incompetent when she refused to co-sign his business loan. Martha, who'd discovered her nephew had been slowly selling off her deceased husband's tools, thinking she wouldn't notice. We weren't bitter. That was the surprising thing. We were clear-eyed and careful, but not bitter. We planted gardens together. Shared recipes. Celebrated grandchildren who called. Mourned those who didn't. Created our own kind of family. Chosen, intentional, protective. One Sunday, almost 2 years after the wedding, I stood in the foundation's main room watching 30 women learn about financial literacy. David was teaching, patient and humble. Amy helped serve coffee, chatting easily with everyone. In the corner, Eleanor reviewed documents with a woman who'd driven 3 hours for help. "You did this," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Evelyn Morrison, Jessica's first known victim. "You took the worst day of your life and built this." "We all did it," I corrected. Every woman who refused to be silent. Every daughter who questioned the papers. Every friend who said, "Wait, this doesn't seem right." We all built this. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I've learned to answer those now. "Mrs. Chen. My name is Robert Kim from Seattle. I'm worried about my mother. My sister just showed up with some documents." I took down the information, promised to connect him with resources. Another family at a crossroads. Another chance to intervene before the damage was done. That evening I had dinner alone in my kitchen. The scratch from the notary's briefcase had been joined by others. Marks from foundation meetings, legal consultations, Sunday dinners. The table told a story now, not of violation but of reclamation. I thought about Edward, about his foresight in protecting me. But I'd learned something he hadn't known. Protection isn't just about money or legal structures. It's about connection. It's about refusing to let isolation become vulnerability. It's about turning Table 19 into a place of power. The doorbell rang. David and Amy stood on my porch with takeout bags. "Thought you might want company," David said simply. We ate together, talking about everything and nothing. About the foundation's expansion plans. About Amy's kindergarten class. About the novel I'd started writing. Normal things. Family things. The things that matter when money and papers and control are stripped away. "I've been thinking," David said as we cleared dishes. "About Dad. About why he didn't tell me about the money." "He was protecting me," I said. "No," David shook his head. "He was protecting me. From what I might become. From what I did become, even without knowing about it." He paused, choosing words carefully. "He knew that money doesn't change people. It reveals them. And he wanted me to reveal myself through actions, not reactions." "You've revealed yourself," I told him. "Every Tuesday at the foundation. Every family you've helped see clearly. Every amend you've made. It's not enough. It'll never be enough." "No," I agreed. "But it's something. And something is how everything begins." They left with promises to return Sunday. Real promises now. The kind built on desire rather than duty. I stood at my window watching their taillights disappear, then turned back to my quiet house. But it wasn't the same quiet anymore. This quiet was full of purpose, of connection, of the knowledge that somewhere tonight, a woman was reading our warning signs and recognizing her own story. Somewhere tonight, a son was questioning why his mother suddenly needed help. Somewhere tonight, a widow was reaching for her phone to call our helpline. The fortune Edward left me had become something neither of us could have imagined. Not just protection for one but power for many. The women of Table 19 had risen, found each other, and built their own banquet. I made tea and sat down to write in the journal I'd started keeping. Tomorrow there would be more calls, more cases, more quiet revolutions in kitchens across the country. But tonight I wanted to capture this feeling. The deep satisfaction of turning pain into purpose, isolation into connection, silence into song. "Dear Edward," I wrote, "you left me money but I found wealth. You gave me protection but I discovered power. You worried about me being alone, but I've never been less lonely. The table they gave me at our son's wedding was in the back corner, forgotten and dismissed. But from that table, I've built a network that stretches across states. From that exile, I've found my tribe. From that silence, I've helped others find their voice." David came back. Not for money but for forgiveness. Not as a taker but as a giver. He teaches at the foundation now, warning others about the slow slide from love to exploitation. He sees me now, really sees me. It took losing everything false to find everything true. The woman at Table 19 was invisible. But invisible women, I've learned, see everything. We see the papers before they're pushed. We see smiles that don't reach our eyes. We see the patterns others miss. And now we see each other. Thank you for the fortune. But more than that, thank you for the foresight. You knew that protection meant more than money. You knew that love sometimes requires distance. You knew that I needed to save myself before I could save anyone else. The orchids are blooming. Late like always but brilliant. Like me perhaps. Like all of us who find our strength after the season says we should. Until we meet again, Ming Ming. I closed the journal and prepared for bed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. More Jessicas circling other women. More sons and daughters struggling between love and greed. More papers pushed across more kitchen tables. But tonight I felt the deep peace of alignment. Every loss had led to this. Every silence had prepared me to speak. Every moment at table 19 had been gathering the power to flip the entire seating chart. The last thing I did before sleeping was check the foundation's emergency phone. 2 new messages. 2 more women needed help. I made notes to call them first thing in the morning, then turned off the light. In the darkness I smiled. Somewhere, Jessica was in prison learning that elder fraud has consequences. Somewhere, Patricia Hartwell was safe with her mother-in-law. Somewhere, women were warning each other, protecting each other, refusing to be silenced or sidelined or served papers they didn't understand. The revolution had begun at table 19. But it wouldn't end there. It would end when every woman knew she had backup. When every widow understood her rights. When every mother knew that love didn't mean being emptied. One story at a time. One warning at a time. One woman at a time. Until the tables turned completely. Until everyone had a seat at the main table. Until family meant protection, not predation. The quiet house held all these promises like seeds in winter soil. And I slept the deep sleep of someone who'd found her purpose in the last season of life. Proving that sometimes the best chapters are written after everyone thinks the story is over. The morning brought fresh snow and 5 new calls to the helpline. I made tea, opened my journal, and began another day of quiet revolution. Because Margaret Chen, the forgotten woman at table 19, had become unforgettable. Not through noise or drama, but through the patient building of something unshakable. A world where no woman faces Jessica alone. A world where silence breaks before spirits do. A world where love means protection, not possession. And at 73, with arthritis in my fingers and silver in my hair, I was just getting started. The Foundation's motto, painted on our wall in Edward's careful architect script, said it all. From forgotten tables we rise together. And we did. One woman at a time. One story at a time. One victory at a time. Until table 19 became the most powerful seat in the house. The beginning. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone who claimed to love you? When family becomes a threat rather than sanctuary, how do we find the strength to stand firm? Share your story in the comments below. Because your voice might be the warning someone else needs to hear. If this story touched something deep within you, if you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table, if you've ever had to choose between being loved and being safe, hit that subscribe button now. Let's build a community where no woman faces predation alone, where age brings wisdom, not vulnerability, where every table is the main table. Together, we're stronger than any paper they can bring to our doors. See you in our next one.